Shalom my friends, I've been a young earth creationist for many years. Now I'm checking if all the arguments for young earth creationism can stand up to scrutiny. I've often heard the claim that there's not enough sedimentation on the seafloor to account for an Earth that is older than 6 to 10,000 years old. First of all, this claim is not entirely correct to begin with, because all the sedimentation that there is on the seafloor accounts for more than that. But still, if the ocean would be, if the Earth would be billions of years old, the ocean floor would be higher than the ocean itself, than the seas itself. So there's a problem, because clearly we have seas still, and clearly the sea bottom is not on top of the sea itself. So there's a problem then, that is the claim at least, there's a problem for people who believe in an old Earth, because there's simply not enough sedimentation on the seafloor. Therefore the Earth must be young. That's how the claim goes. The question is, if there no other way to explain the lack of these sediments? The answer used to be no, and that was a problem for geologists. But trusting that the problem would be solved someday, it was not such a big issue and went mostly ignored. But it did form an opportunity for the young Earth creationists to say, hey, you see, there's a hole, there's a gap in what you can prove. Therefore, my interpretation of the Bible must be right. But, as it turns out, the Earth has a mechanism for this. During World War II, a mineralogist named Harry Hess discovered that there was a huge mountain ridge under the surface of the sea. I guess most of you have seen this before. There is here a big mountain ridge, and here another one, and here another one. I'll put it bigger on the screen. As you see, these mountain ridges go through all the different seas and are extremely big. Together they are like 75,000 kilometers in total. And what is interesting about this mountain ridge is that it has, running through the middle of it, a 20 kilometers wide canyon. Well, that's interesting. What is that? It cannot be there just something like that doesn't come in existence just like that. So they began to investigate what this is about, and they found out that closer to the ridge the ocean floor is younger, and closer to the shore the ocean floor is older, and we're talking about 150 to 175 million years old. This could mean only one thing. If in the middle it is younger and at the sides it's older, it means that new crust is being created at the seam, and it goes outwards towards the east and towards the west, towards the shores. The crust of the continents dated billions of years old, but the seafloor in total dated much younger. So even right beside the continent, close to the shore, it was much younger than on the continent itself. So what is going on here? The crust of the seafloor is continuously being refreshed and recycled, like some sort of a conveyor belt, you could say. And once it gets to the continent, it dives underneath. It dives underneath the continent back into the interior of the Earth. And when it does so, it takes all the deposited sediments along. That's also what we see. Closer to the ridge, there's very little sedimentation, because there hadn't been so much time for all these sediments to accumulate. Closer to shore, there's millions of years worth of sedimentation. Why? Well, because these parts of the ocean floor exist much longer, so has been much more time to collect sediments. And then, once the sediments are there, closer to the shore, they are being brought to the interior of the Earth to be recycled. That's basically the story. Is this something real, or is this just a convenient model for evolutionists just to prove that their theory fits with the geological timescale and whatever. No, this is not some model that scientists just made up to solve a problem they've been having. This was a problem, but they have not been making this sort of stuff up. Actually, it is the other way around. When Hess came up with this idea, the scientific community was far from ready to accept it. Actually, they said, you know what, this is too fantastical. This is just, you better first prove it, because this is just nonsensical. Well, during the 60s, a lot of evidence came about. A lot of things were discovered that proved actually that this theory was correct. The theory of the tectonic plates. So the evidence was building up. But for example, the dates were coinciding. Radiometric dating showed that closer towards the ridge it was younger, closer towards the shore it was older, like we just concluded. And this is done by radiometric dating. Well, there's a whole lot of talk about radiometric dating, and we'll go into that later in a later episode. But take it from the scientists that it is much more reliable than some people will have you believe. Okay, and there's the calculation of the distance of the continent to the ridge. So if you divide that distance by the amount of years and etc., you'll come to the same number. The amount of sediments closer to the shore, if you add that up, divided by by the amount of sediment that comes out of the rivers into the sea, you will end up again with a similar number. And then there are the changes in the magnetic field that you can find back in the crust of the Earth. I'm not going into that subject now. I might later, but there are just evidence was accumulating, and at some point the scientists, evolutionaries, said, okay, you know what, we consider this proven now because we have so many evidences that point towards this. We will admit that we were wrong about this. We are going to accept this theory from now on. And that is how science works. I want to make one final point. There used to be a hole in the scientific understanding, because there was no accounting for where all those sediments went. Then there's two things you can do. You can say this must have been because of supernatural intervention. And that's what the creationists have been doing. You see, my interpretation of the Bible, and I say that very carefully, my interpretation of the Bible is right because you cannot explain where all the sedimentation went. You can say that second of all, you can say that the natural force that we do not understand yet is at work. Well, in this case, that was right. There was another mechanism at work that we didn't understand back then. The first option, saying that there is a supernatural intervention, can just simply not be part of science, because science studies nature, and the supernatural force is not connected to nature. That's why it is supernatural, right? Science is the study of what we can observe, and what we can test, and what we can demonstrate. All these things have to do with what is physically there. We cannot directly observe God, because God is above the natural world. In other words, science studies the creation and not the creator. For studying the creator, as far as that is possible, we have something called theology. If this would not be part of theology instead of science, we would have a problem, because all the research would be void. All science would be void, because we would start out with our conclusions, for example, that the Earth is young, and then only then turn to the data and interpret the data accordingly. That is the world upside down. What we need to do is look at the data and conclude from the data. And that is also how science has always worked. Someone proposes a thesis, and others try to debunk it. And they try to debunk it and debunk it and debunk it and debunk it and debunk it until there's no longer any debunking possible, and then, okay, this is proven. That is how science works. The whole scientific community works together to find the truth, or at least to approach the truth. And therefore I make a case for the separation of science and religion. Oh, wait a second. Therefore I make a case for the separation of science and religion. Both are important and both are enriching, and they don't have to be in each other's way. Religion brought us civilization, all we know to be right and true, and how the world works. Everything that we see about us, around us, all the social structures and who knows what, have been built on a Judeo-Christian culture. And that is a very important thing. Our law system, our legal system is built upon that. But science brought us technology and medicine. How far would we be, where would we be without germ theory, without vaccines? How many more people would die in pandemics and epidemics and such without that kind of science? And the world would have looked completely different without computers, etc. So science and religion both have a very important task within society. And then there's of course also your own personal faith. And that is something untouchable. If you believe a certain thing to be right, and you look at the world and think, yeah, I still see it. If you look at science and you still think, yes, I believe that what I believe is right, then go ahead. Because that is something that goes above what we can observe and test and demonstrate. And if your religion is true, it will comply with scientific observation. If your faith is true, you will have absolutely nothing to fear from science. Of course, as a side note, also in interpreting science, you need to use your mind and not blindly follow everything you hear. Sometimes science simply doesn't have the answer. They will be speaking in terms of hypotheses, ideas, theories and such. And sometimes it gets a bit confusing about what is actually really proven and what is only theory. So keep your eyes open when you study this sort of stuff. But when the truth will come out, the truth will become clear also when you study the science, and at some point you will see this is undeniable, well, that is mostly theory, and in that way you can see if what you believe holds up to scrutiny. Well, that is what I'm doing now. This particular thing that I talked about here does not prove that the Earth is young. It also does not prove that the Earth cannot be can only be very old. The limit here is at about 175 million years. I don't think with this particular theory you can look much further than that. But I do think it proves that 175 million years is kind of the minimal age of the Earth. So it does kind of debunk the idea of a 6 to 10 years old world. Okay, thanks for hearing me out. Bye bye.